E.R.A.S.E is an organization. It's a movement. We're talking about unity. We're talking about unity. So we're aimed to taking down the system of race by educating, enlightening, informing, and positively debating with those who have counterviews.
Hey, welcome to Talk About Unity here at Edge Radio. I'm Carlen Charleston. I'm your host today, and I'm sitting kind of lonely because I'm missing my co-host, Richard Jennings. He got called he has jury duty. And so kind of when government calls, and government's been calling a lot in the last week, and we're going to talk about that a little later in the show, but when government calls, you got to be there. So I'm here lonely today, but it doesn't matter because I'm excited about the show today, and I've got an outstanding guest, the one and only Miss Kym Crooms. I say coming straight out of Georgia, not out of Compton, straight out of Georgia. And so it's going to be an interesting show. And so we're going to get to that. But with the events of last week, we really do have a lot to cover. And so there's no better guest that I'd like to have than Kym, because we talk about these kinds of things. She's in a position right now where she's very privy to a lot of the things that have been happening in the political environment. And so we'll have a great show as we talk about that. But I want to kind of think about and take some time this morning to give you Carlen's commentary. You get used to hearing me talk about some of these things, but I have some messages to America that I really think are important for us to lay out, because when you look at some of the things that happened last week and the way that people responded to them, then we've got to understand, and I guess this is why I would be the person called to do this unity thing, because that's my first thought is, how can we bring unity out of chaos? And that hasn't happened so well in our country in the past, and I don't think it's happening well now. So in Carlen's commentary today, I'm going to give 3 messages to America that I think are going to be very important for us to understand as we go forward. Key word there, forward. Okay, if we want to stay where we are, it's not much that needs to be done. We can do this. We've been doing this for many years, centuries even, and we can stay there. But if we want to go forward, then these are the messages you need to hear. Okay, and the first message I have to America is that, number one, hate is easy. Hate is easy. This division and this divisiveness that's happening in our country, and the way that you so quickly can cancel people, hate people for their viewpoints and those things, that's very easy to do. And it doesn't take much for us to do that. It has gone on so long that in our country's existence that it will take an intentional effort to quell that, to stop the hate and division that's happening now in our country. And if we decide rather to live in the default position, then we will continue to hate. We hate, they hate, and we all hate. And that's easy. That's message number 1. Hate is easy. And so if you want easy, just stay where you are. Message 2 is love is hard. Love is hard. Why is love so hard? Because it's sacrificial. It takes work from you. It means I have to give up my rights sometimes. I have to give up this thing that I want to do, that I prefer to do. I have to give that up for others. See, because you're not thinking about others if you're choosing the default position of hate, because that's easy. But the hard thing is to think about others and to sacrifice oneself, one's rights, one's opportunities for the good of the greater part of us. And that's the other thing I want to bring about. In our third point, our message 3, love and hate both represent opportunities for unity. They represent opportunities. Yeah, we think of sometimes only the good things that happen to us in life, or the things that bring about unity, or that bring about love and this caring because people did good things. But think about sometimes it comes out of hate. I want to go reflect back on 9/11. George W. Bush was the president. Very bad thing. Hate at its best. You know, we thought we seen hate. That was hate. Thousands of people killed because people hated so much. And out of that, President Bush stood there at that collapsed World Trade Center, and he stood there, and these were his words. He said, "The people who did this will hear from us soon." That simple us word, if you remember 2001, that happened in the first year of his presidency. I say that when he made that statement of us, he was reelected. That's what got him his reelection, and he served, of course, for 2 terms, 8 years, because he said us. When what happened on this past Wednesday happened to our nation's capital, we should have seen that as an attack on us. That was us. Us standing for the United States of America. Us is who we are. And if we had taken the opportunity, and we still can take the opportunity to say that's us, those people, the perpetrators of that act, made an attack on us, then we have taken advantage of the opportunity for unity. We've now got vision, purpose out of hate, out of divisiveness, out of destruction. We bring unity. And so that's what we're looking forward to doing here on Talk About Unity. And that's Carlen's commentary for America. You can choose the easy way out, which is hate. You can choose the hard way out, which is love, and begin to sacrifice for good of others. And we can take this opportunity to make America greater and better. And so that's Carlen's commentary. And hey, we're going to take a break here. And after I come back, I want to leave maximum time because Kym and I are definitely going to need it because we got lots to talk about this morning. And so I'm really excited about it. And so join us here in a couple of minutes back here on Talk About Unity with Kym Crooms. Here we go. Hello, I'm Carlen Charleston, Executive Director of E.R.A.S.E, and I want to take this time to invite you to an opportunity to change the world. Perhaps you're too busy and too preoccupied to help change the world, but please take the next 2 minutes to listen to how we plan to do it. The divisiveness and bitterness observed in our country today is not a coincidence of the current administration or any administration before. It is also not a product of a singular or multiple infractions by a zealous or racist police force. No, the race problem precedes the founding of our country. Our very history speaks in racial language, and most everything that happens in our society now carries with it racial baggage. It simply does not have to stay that way. The Erase Race campaign has only one objective: the unifying of all Americans, and that without regard to the color of their skin. This is a difficult challenge because of our history, but we can do it if we believe. If we believe that Martin Luther King Jr. was right when he said, "We are tied together in a single garment of destiny," we can do it. We can do it if we believe the founding principles upon which our country was built, that all men are created equal, we can do it. And if we believe that God did in fact make all nations of men from one man, and that we are all therefore part of one family, one race, then we can do it. Yes, the task is monumental, but the reward is worth the challenge. If you would like to join us as we change America and inevitably change the world, go to eraseraces.com, sign up today, and welcome to Erase Races, because there is only one race, and you're in it. And welcome back to our second show of 2021. And it's a very special show. I have my great friend of almost 30 years. You know, it'll be 30 years, I think, in another year. It'll be 30 years. And I want to just say that she is such a consummate professional. You know, it is Kym Crooms. And let me give you her bio so we can get right to this stuff. But, you know, Kym has a degree in journalism from the University of Georgia and a master's in public administration from the University of Oklahoma. She has 20 years experience as a civil servant in child welfare, spending most of that time as a state liaison and strategist regarding child protection and prevention services, foster care, and adoptions. She is the CEO of Hodgepodge Clarity Consulting, and I met her in Okinawa, Japan many years ago working as a journalist, and I was one of her first interviews, and so we definitely go back. She loves writing, pointing out mostly the hypocritical shenanigans that are happening in Washington, D.C., and helping realign Carlen's, my particular political beliefs. That's what she's been trying to do for many years to match hers. So that's a continual work in progress, and some of that might happen even today. And besides all of that, her first loves are her two sons, which I call my boys, David and Duran. And so I want to welcome to the show my friend and sometimes my nemesis and enemy, Kym Crooms. Welcome to the show. So glad to have you here. Love you.
Well, thank you for that warm welcome. And I say it was pretty accurate, I would say. But first, before I start, I just want to say that all these views that I'm going to talk about today, they're personal. They're my views. They don't represent any company or agency that I may be affiliated with. But I say that as a caveat because some people might disagree. In particular,
you mean some people other than me?
But I did want to start one thing, Carl. I wanted to say I want to start the show off on a good note. So I'm going to start off with the one thing that in your commentary that I did agree with, and that is.
Did you only agree with one thing? Okay, let's go ahead.
I'll try to find some more throughout our conversation, but let's just stick with the one that I can think of right now. So one thing that you did say, though, in your commentary was that the attack on the Capitol was, in fact, an attack on all of us, and we should all see it that way. And also as an attack on our democracy. But okay, I'm ready. I'm fired up and ready. I got my coffee, and I'm ready.
And if I start out this show and I've already got 1 point of agreement with Kym, it's a victory. I've got nothing but a victory. But hey, let's talk about that, though. I mean, go ahead and give me, any views. What did you think about last week? Was it Tuesday, Wednesday? Yeah, what did you think about that? I mean, just give me your overarching view, because we're going to cover some of the details about that later on in the show, but what did you think about that?
Yeah, that's a loaded question in a way, because there's so much to think about with regard to what happened. There's just so many elements and dynamics there. Mm-hmm. For one, we can look at the paradigm between, and I know this has been brought up a lot, even including, you've already brought it up too once, Carlen, before, is a lot of people have made a lot about what if those people who were storming the Capitol were of a different color? What if it were, or not even just of a different color, but just what if they were those who were in favor of the Black Lives Matter movement? Would there have been a different reaction from the Capitol point of view? And I say yes to that I do think that it would be there would have been a different approach, but I think that alone does not get to the core of the problems, because we have other issues at hand here. First of all, the things that motivated those people who wanted to storm the Capitol, and those people who felt that they had the right, or felt that they were in the right to do so, and those people who felt like doing so was a patriotic act, and then people who don't have for me, in my opinion, a true understanding of the fragility of our democracy today, and why that is so significant for not just today, but significant for our children and our grandchildren. Mm-hmm. But also the other issue in there was you had people who were inside that Capitol who were wearing things that were reminiscent of Auschwitz and concentration camps and the Holocaust. And they were highlighting that and featuring that with pride. And there's some great concern. And I think there's some people who have been Trump supporters who would tell you, I'm not a racist. I support Trump because X, Y, Z, whatever the reason might be, maybe it's economic reasons, mm-hmm. or maybe they capitalists, whatever, mm-hmm. but they'll go, I'm a Trumper, but I'm not a racist. And so that begs a question as to, if you support Donald Trump, are you in fact a racist? And that brings up that question. But also, and for me, I think it's pretty simple. If you're walking down the street and the person next to you, you're in a march, and the person to the right of you is got the flag upside down, and the person to the left of you has got on some Auschwitz camp T-shirt or something that espouses, support for the Holocaust, and then the person in front of you has got a cross, a burned cross, and is carrying in front of you. Are even if you believe, even if the three of you are anti-abortion,
Mm-hmm.
even if the three of you are anti-abortion, are you still hanging with the right crowd? Are you going to still agree to be a part of that group? Do you still feel like you're on the right side of history if you're
Well, and
marching down the street
right, and
with those three?
and all those points that you're making, I think are very valid. And so I want you to reflect and compare those to, of course, the protests, of course, of this past summer as well. Because if you look at some of those situations, and you had some of the same defense arguments made by Black Lives Matter when they said that was not us; those were infiltrators. And so, could they perhaps have had the same issues, with people blending in with them, trying to make them look bad? I mean, and so does that work for both of these arguments? Does that work for either one of those? Because surely, when you understand that, I mean, when you look at some of the people that were there, logically, we know that everybody didn't go inside the Capitol. Everybody didn't go in and have the same means. And so we would logically assume that not all the people are the same that are in there. And your point is good that however you see these other people, how do you separate yourself, or do you separate yourself from them? And so can you draw a distinction between what happened this past summer, and even into the extent of,
Carlen,
let me get to this one point before I let you go, because the one you make about, and I heard that a lot, if they had been different, if they had been black, if they had been this or that. But we actually have circumstances like we did in Seattle when they created the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. They called the Chaz there, that was taken over by Black Lives Matter. And remember, President Trump had a problem with the fact that the mayor wasn't doing anything and allowing them to go for, which it eventually ended up being about a month. But initially, in the first few days and weeks, he was saying, why are you not doing anything? I'm going to send in National Guard troops. And so that was a situation where they not only if they had been black, but they were black, and nothing happened at the time. So, all right, go ahead. Your spin.
All right, so that's unfair, but that's okay. You threw about 5 or 10 different issues in there at me, Carlen. but that's all right.
Well, but it's really just one.
I'm used to it.
But here's the one question: Is there consistency in what the things that we're saying now? Because I listened to Chris Cuomo on CNN and some Don Lemon, and I'm going, these words were not used in the same situation. They said those people, destruction of this property is not okay. I was like, whoa. I never heard that this past summer. All right, go ahead.
All right. Yeah, my turn.
Your turn.
No, but I do want to talk about, that's a good point that I wanted to talk about too, is that some people were wanting to say, well, some of those people who were in the Capitol weren't all in agreement. There were some people in there who were fake or pretending to be Trumpers, and they really weren't. Some people were saying those were actually Antifa people trying to make making the Proud Boys or the Proud people look bad, that they really wasn't them. It was some other people wanted to, blame others. Let's talk about that for a minute. First of all, I want to say is that a lot of the people that they have captured and have arrested and have been charged in this incident, they have shown them to be people who have had white supremacy language and have incited violence on their own Facebook pages. I have not yet, maybe there is some, but I have not yet seen any of the people who have been charged thus far, who have been proven to be something other than, or been a part of Antifa or part of the Black Lives Matter movement, or some people who are imposters, if you will. Sure, now, could there have been some imposters there? Sure, but that was not the mass majority. Clearly not the majority of people who were there were not there as imposters. This was truly an act of hate and also a privilege. But I know people will say, well, wait a minute. and well, I mean, I also want to talk about the fact that there were people that was burning down um, buildings during the Black Lives Matters protests and marches.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, but there were some proven incidents, like for example, when I think it was the auto store, and I believe a Target maybe. I may be incorrect on the name of those two buildings, but there was proven that there were people who had actually burned down those buildings and blamed it on the Black Lives Matter protesters, when in actuality it was not a Black Lives Matter protester who had done it. So they had been falsely accused, and that had been proven. But to me, this finger pointing thing is not productive.
You
It's
got a
not
point of agreement. One point of agreement right there. I agree. I'm with you.
I think what we really need to do is get to the core of why the people who were not imposters, why they felt compelled to storm a Capitol building.
Okay, so we
also,
totally agree there. We totally agree there, because here's my issue. It's the same one, and I'm getting ready to tie this in big time. This is going to be magical. Listen to this, all right? Because our whole deal with the concept of race is that it allows us to place a label on people so that we can group them. Placing a label right now is the thing that's keeping us from taking appropriate actions against the perpetrators of these things. It doesn't matter what label you're carrying. It doesn't matter what banner you're under. You have perpetrated a particular act for which you will now be held accountable. I don't care what organization or who you're a part of. And so when they find out that this person was this or that, it's nice that we know that. It doesn't matter to me. You need to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law for what you did. And so that's why I think the labeling, we're so used to labeling as a result of race. We're so used to putting people in groups that's what we're looking at doing right now. So we spend more time on that than we do saying, hey, let's take action against these people. We spend time saying, are they Antifa? Are they this? Are they that? Does it really matter? Let's take action.
But Carlen, I do want to ask you this though. Would you be willing to say that those people who stormed the Capitol were unpatriotic?
Oh, absolutely. This is the definition of unpatriotic. You're breaking down the very system that you are supposedly supporting as a patriot. You're trying to break that down. So that makes you unpatriotic. Of course it does. Yeah, that absolutely. Hey, all right, so we might come back around to this, but because I wanted to start out with Georgia, because I mean, you're the quintessential person to have on considering what just happened in Georgia, and that's where I want to go, and then maybe we'll get back to this national stuff, all right? So let's talk about Georgia, because I started out the show saying Georgia's on my mind, all right? And so
bring it on home.
So I know you, and I'm gonna turn you loose on this, because I know you got feelings about what happened in Georgia. What does this mean for Georgia that they took those 2 Senate seats? And I mean, you were a big part of that, because you do your political stuff there in Georgia. What does that mean for you? And what does it mean for Georgia in a historically red southern state that we have 2 Democratic senators there? What does all this mean? Give us the Georgia viewpoint.
Well, no question about it. The state of Georgia has made history. Absolutely. But not just for the obvious things that people will say, Georgia has turned, has flipped blue. I don't know. I still personally think Georgia's still purple. Uh-huh. But I think we've been purple for quite some time. I think we've been purple because some people may not remember back because they may not know Georgia politics so much, but I want to talk a little bit about Zell Miller era and the Roy Barnes era, because Zell Miller was in fact a Democrat governor, but he was what a lot of people might call a dino, which they call a Democrat in name only, right. Because he eventually, even as a Democrat, he actually spoke at the Republican convention.
Yeah, I remember that.
So back then, actually, I think that's when, to tell you the truth, I think that's when Georgia was solidly red, was while Zell Miller was actually a Democrat leading the state. Mm-hmm. And then it got kind of murky, because then, a lot of the Democrats then especially long before Zell Miller had even become governor, a lot of the Democrats had switched over to the Republican Party. And so Georgia is an anomaly in so many ways. When after Del Miller, there was we had Roy Barnes, who was running for governor, and he was a Democrat, and he came very, very close to winning. I think if he hadn't frustrated the teachers of the state, he actually would have won, and I think Georgia would actually have been considered blue way back then. But that is the only reason why he lost. And a lot of people, and I know you want to talk about this later, but a lot of people like to say, well, this historical win should be largely in the hands of Stacey Abrams, because I will say to you that, when you ask, how did Georgia do this? How did Georgia win? Or how did, our Senator Warnock or Senator Ossoff won this? They won because they got the votes. That's the bottom line. That's the only way you can win, is by getting votes. Well, Stacey Abrams understood that. She understood that votes wins elections. And she went out. But the thing is, in order to vote, you got to be registered to vote. So you can, you can't wait till the day of the day before the election and go out and tell people, hey, go vote, 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 because you're still only talking to the people who are registered. So she went out and registered almost 70,000 new voters, almost 70. She registered all, and I can tell you that is how we won. Now, I do want to say this too. I love Stacey Abrams, and she deserves all the kudos she's been getting. But I can tell you there have been some boots on the ground years before Stacey Abrams came on the scene. And I would love to name a long list of those people that I know, but I won't. But I will say Stacey Abrams deserves all her kudos, but there have been some people on the sidewalks. This is back when we had clipboards and ink pens and knocking on people's doors before face masks and actually talking to people face to face, trying to get them to register to vote. But there's a lot more I want to say about Georgia, but I was going to let you get something in if you wanted to.
Well, I will ask you about Georgia because I had those general questions about how is Georgia doing economically during this COVID period? How is it doing? Because it seemed during the election, as all eyes in the country were focused on Georgia, that Georgia, it looked. I'm just going to say it's. Maybe that's what made it look so prosperous or whatever. But it looked like you're not. Everybody's under COVID. But how is Georgia doing? And what is Georgia like? What is the environment?
That's the problem with a lot of these politicians, is that they don't understand how to measure prosperity. Because if you look at it in one way, for example, Georgia actually has an 8% surplus in its budget than it did from last year. So, if you just look at it from that paradigm, Georgia is prosperous, right? No, there are so many people. You got to look at unemployment. And then that's another thing. Some people just look at the jobs numbers. They just want to say, let's just look at unemployment. Yeah, but over 160 or I may have my numbers wrong, but about 140,000 jobs were lost recently in this last election cycle, and 100% of those were women. So you can't just look at, you've got to be very clear at how you looking at or how you define prosperity. And because you got to say prosperity for who? And that's the other thing. That's the problem. A lot of people don't understand is that it's not so much that people are anti-capitalism, as so much as they are for balance. You can't just be for capitalism for yourself. We live in a community. We all depend upon one another. We are all in this together. And I think that is what gets lost on so many people when they begin to think about politics and who they're going to vote for. We have to start looking at humanity. And I think that's why you cannot run the country like a business. Sure, there are lots of great, wonderful business skills that are transferable over into management and managing of the country and the operational pieces. But if you're going to run a country, you have to put humanity first. I think a lot of people voted for Donald Trump because they thought of him, rightly or wrongly, thought of him as a good businessman. And they thought, oh yeah, he's such a great businessman. Let's let him run the country. I will argue that I disagree with that description of him being a great businessman. I must admit, I feel that some people have been conned, but I digress. Anyway, I think when you get ready to run a country, you have to not only bring your business skills to the table, but you also need to be able to have a vision of how people are interrelated and how, and I think that's one thing about this pandemic, I think is a lot of times tragedy and adversity turns out to be some of the best things that ever happened to us. And
Sounds like my commentary. There you go.
And one of the best things that's come out of this pandemic is that it is a tangible, visible way of seeing how we must depend upon one another, and how what happens to one person affects the other person, and how you cannot ignore the benefits or the health or the humanity or the welfare. You cannot ignore the welfare of someone else.
Outstanding. We're going to piggyback on that as soon as we come back from our break. We're going to take a commercial break. We're going to come back because that's why I'm letting you go on, because you're saying all the things that sound like Carlen. All right.
Well, this ain't right, Carlen. We're agreeing on way too much.
There's a lot of agreement. All right. So when we come back, we're going to get into some things that maybe don't have so much agreement right after we take this break on Talk About Unity. And welcome back to Talk About Unity. And today, Unity is happening. It's breaking out. Normally, Unity is not happening as much, especially when I got other guests on the show. But today, I've got Kym Crooms out of the ATL. She's here today, and she's saying things. And I can just be quiet today and just let her talk, because she's giving the E.R.A.S.E to Talk About Unity talk that you would hear from Carlen. And if you heard Carlen's commentary, which we'll make that available to you all later on so you can hear that. But we might just take snippets of Kym and interpose those, because she's saying basically the same thing. So Kym's, and now Kym is supposed to be, because Kym is a longtime friend and we sit on different sides of, and she's trying to get me straight politically, and she's been trying to do that for years. And so, and I've been trying to hire her so she could do that, but she's too busy working there in Georgia. And so she was just sharing with us, and I want to kind of segue, and she's going to continue to share those things. I'm sure we'll get back to what she was saying, but I want to ask her some deeper questions. I really do want to get to the heart of what I think is happening in our country. I'm going to just speak for about 30 seconds, tell you my view on this, and then let Kym go with her view on what's happening here. Because Nancy Pelosi, of course, the Speaker of the House, the newly re-elected Speaker of the House, that they're going with her again, so they believe in her leadership. And she gave Donald Trump these options. She said, you resign, we impeach you, or we get Vice President Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment. All right, and so it looks like none of those other things are going to happen, the resignation and the 25th Amendment. So she's moving forward with the articles of impeachment. Now, Kym was doing a beautiful job talking about what unity actually happens. And that was part of my commentary we talked about in the beginning. But Kym, I want to ask you, so what do you think is the road ahead for, what is the optimal road ahead for us? What is the one that provides the best solutions for our country for where we are right now?
Well, to me, it's really a simple response, because your actions and your behavior require accountability and consequences. And I could go on and on about the whole political piece, that like some people are saying, well, we might want to wait to impeach him because, after, let the impeachment part come after the Senate changes, after the inauguration and the administration switches over, because he's more likely to actually get impeached if we wait. And some people are saying, wait a minute, don't let's not invoke the 25th, because now that means we have Pence, and Pence will probably pardon Trump, and this, there's so many, and then also some people are saying, that's the last thing I want is Pence to have, that much power. And so we should, so a lot of people are thinking about this, which makes sense. It's a political realm. So a lot of people are thinking about this along the lines of politics. But to me, you got to peel all the layers back and go, wait a minute, what was the action and what should be the consequence of that action? So regardless of who the players are, one thing that is, I don't think could be, some people will argue, but I think it's not arguable, is the fact that the president of the United States incited violence. You have to understand, and I don't know if you know this, Carlen, but I'm a huge Spider-Man fan. And one of the reasons, many reasons why, but one of the reasons is because in Spider-Man, he always says, with great power comes great responsibility. And as the president, you have your megaphone is extraordinarily powerful. It's on a different level than the casual, ordinary citizen walking down the street.
Right.
What you say has power, and you have a great responsibility with regard to how you use that power. So no question in my mind that what the president of the United States did, not just on that day when he said, follow me to the Capitol, but also all the many things that he said at his rallies where he knew what was going to be the response of his verbiage. So there should be a consequence for that.
Okay, and let's talk. So if there's going to be a consequence, and here's the key as we talk about unity and what's happening in Washington, D.C. And here's where I think the rub is going to be. If you've got Republicans at this point, which you can kind of hear them now speaking, condemning a lot of the actions of the president like you've never seen before, because most of them usually are quiet, and very rarely did anybody condemn any of his actions on the Republican side. But now you're hearing more of them. Is it important then at this point for us to build a bipartisan effort in any action we take, or do we once again, and this is my fear of Nancy Pelosi, that she's very, we've seen this before from her, the overreach that she does, which alienates the others who would have been part of her team in a bipartisan effort. Is that important? Because that's what I think. Let me tell you how I see this happening. I see this happening as Nancy Pelosi doing the overreach and saying, we're going to prove that he incited an insurrection against the government, and Republicans saying, well, that's going to be, we're going to argue about that. I mean, we just went through this with the previous impeachment. It's arguable about what he really meant and how he said it. But those same Republicans would say, if we went for censure or if we went with something slight short of that, we're fully on board. So do you push hardline and say we're going to have it our way, or do you try to build a coalition in this case?
Of course, Nancy Pelosi should be trying to make sure that this is whatever response that she takes, that it is a bipartisan response. But you have to remember that there's a boundary. There's certain people we don't negotiate. We don't negotiate.
Not worry about that boundary.
We don't negotiate with terrorists. We don't negotiate with
But treason. Do we negotiate with our fellow members of Congress is the issue here. It has nothing to do with the actions. It has to do with what we're able to do together.
As long as they are negotiating in goodwill and in good faith. We don't, like I said, we don't negotiate, for example, we don't negotiate with the Josh Hawleys of the world.
Well,
We
do you
don't
think?
negotiate.
Do
We
you
don't
think that?
negotiate with people who deny facts.
Okay, but do you
Okay,
think
the
people going for
election was not.
censure, vice impeachment, is that not enough? Or I mean, and what do you think is going to happen if that is the case? If the Republicans say we do want to do something, but we want to do it short of impeachment, what do you think happens there? Do you think Nancy should hold the hard line and say we're going forward with impeachment, or should she try to go bipartisan?
Like I said, it depends on what the rationale is behind not impeaching. What is the rationale behind just a censure?
Well,
Here's my
let me
thing.
give you what their view would
And
be. Their view would be this.
what?
I can tell you what their view is going to be. I
Okay,
know
okay. What's the argument?
their view is going to be our country is really hurt and needs healing. We need to come together. If we go through this, it's going to create more division and more animosity and more hatred. We're stoking the fires. We have an opportunity. He's got 9 days left in office, 8 days left in office, and he'll be gone. We can deal with that in a separate area that does not affect our progress going forward. It does not hinder our current president-elect from getting the things done that he wants to by having everybody bogged down in this thing. We can be more focused as a country. Yes, it's been a nightmare, and we would prefer that we just move on, but do some things short of impeachment so that we're not. I mean, because think about it, those congressmen, those people are
I
going to
got
be.
a question for you, Carlen.
What's
I
that,
got a
ma'am?
question for you.
Okay.
Do you refrain from punishing your child from their behavior because they're going to get mad? Because it's just going to make them madder.
It has
you
nothing to do
refrain
with
from the
how mad
punishment.
it makes him. It has to do with, am I mitigating that my punishment based on other factors? And so there are times when, because I did not want to provoke my child to any more anger, then I didn't do the thing that maybe would have been more harsh and more painful, might have gotten the point across to them, but I stand the risk of raising the ire of my child in such a manner that they are, that they're not as cooperative. And because I remember, at the end of the day,
But your ultimate,
we've got an
but
objective
Carlen,
here.
Carlen, your ultimate goal was to make sure that you got your point across, right? And that the behavior was changed. That's you considered, you maybe have tempered the level with which you punish the child. But the ultimate goal, like you said, is to make sure there's accountability and that you change the behavior, correct? Well, here's my thing about the impeachment. Donald Trump, we saw what happened when he was impeached the first time. It did not change his behavior. It was not effective. So if you think that anything short of impeachment is going to actually be effective, I think you're delusional.
Right, and yeah, and I don't think, because reality is this, and anybody who knows me deeply and knows how I felt about Donald Trump from the beginning, I didn't think there was anything that was going to change his behavior. And I don't think anything that you do now is going to change his behavior. And in fact, I don't think that's what we should be trying to do. I think we should be making an example of what accountability means. And so that's why it should be a bipartisan effort where everybody comes together and say, when you do things of this sort, there has to be a level of accountability. And so it's got to be something of that sort. But I do see the politics of Washington. I understand the politics of Washington. And if Nancy Pelosi does her overreach, then we create more division. And I just don't think that's good for our country, because in the scenario that you gave where, you're disciplining your child, there's that objective of correction. But in this case, I think we have a greater objective of the unity of our country, which is much more important right now than Donald Trump.
Well, I agree with you on one front that it's probably not likely to change his behavior, but it is likely to change the behavior of others who come behind him. Those we need to demonstrate that it is not acceptable by our electorate, by our constituencies. We need to set the example that this is not acceptable. And there's things that happens to Carlen, to people who we consider to not be able to be transformed. We usually put those people behind bars when we feel like that they're not able to change their behavior.
So so where along the way do we decide that we want to be bipartisan? When does that happen?
What do you mean when we decide to be bipartisan?
When does
you know what? That is a very good question about bipartisanship. That is something that has been lost for some time. It's been, and I admit, and this is one of those instances where I try not to say this too often, but this is one of those instances where it is occurring on both sides of the aisle a lot of times are putting party before country.
Yes.
And we're taking this.
Another point of agreement. It's amazing. We're getting a lot of agreement. All right, Kym, another point of agreement. Go.
But but we probably have some arguments about who does it more than the other. But I won't go there right now. But anyway, so one of the things I wish people would go back to sports and think about the championships and how when you support your team, and then when your team loses the division to another team, you support the division and you keep, and you move up the ladder. Then, okay, when your division lose, then you support the next rung on the ladder. You go, you don't just stay in your loserville, place and just, continue and then try to tear everybody else down, or shoot down all the other teams. You go to the bigger picture. So same thing, like for example, when your person loses the primary, that doesn't mean that you just don't vote in the general election. No, you go to the next rung and you support, and so the thing is, you should be cheering the whole way, not tearing down, not, okay, I'm just cheering for my person, and then when they lose, then I'm done with, no more victories. I'm not cheering for anybody more. Ultimately, in the end, we should be cheering for our country. By the time we get to the end of the election, by the time we get to the presidency, we should be, at this point, everybody should be behind the president going, I want this president to do it. This may not have been the one that I chose, or may not have been the one I started with, started supporting. But if this president does well, that means our whole country will do well.
Right.
Now, let me go back, because I know some people are going, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Well,
I think the first time I heard that was Barack Obama, when Mitch McConnell did it to Barack Obama. I think that was the first time I ever heard somebody say, it's my job to make sure he's a one-term president, where he was doing everything seemingly to work against him. I don't think I heard it before then.
We got some agreement on that too. So that's exciting. That was probably one of the beginnings where it was about party and not the country. People should have begun to support Obama. You didn't have to like him. You didn't have to agree with everything. I think even the people who voted for him didn't agree with everything he did or did not do. But you have to understand is that if he is successful, that means our country is successful. And we've got to get back to that.
Well, how do we do that? I mean, how? See, and this is what I'm saying. You've got Nancy Pelosi. I'm saying these are some of the things, I talked about in my commentary, the love thing. You've got to sacrifice. Somebody's got to give up something. And if we want to stay entrenched in our positions on the hard right, hard left, and nobody's willing to give up anything, then we stay at war. And that's where I think we are. So how do we do that? How do we do that practically? I would say it would be Nancy Pelosi saying, let's find a point of agreement with the other side of the aisle, and this is the way we will prosecute the president of the United States on something that we all have come to consensus on and we agree upon. Why don't they go and sit in some room, and do that and come to an agreement and say, let's go forward, united, because that would be beautiful for the country.
This is really hard though, Carlen. Like you said, this is really, it's hard on so many levels. First of all, like you said, I agree. You got to lead with your heart. That's the first thing. And leading with your heart sometimes means you have to be the first one to extend your hand before the other person. And I know a lot of people, that's really hard, because a lot of people are going to be like, but wait a minute, I've extended my hand so many times that, and come back with a nub. Now, I ain't got no more arm left to extend because it's been cut off so many times. So I get that frustration, but also it's just so many other things. Just so many other elements. Like, for example, let's just talk about people living in their bubble and the messaging that they're getting, social media. And, people are going to have to be willing to communicate with people, not just to be heard, but to understand, and not to just to be heard and to be understood, but to also understand. And that's one of the things I try to do. Because I'm like, somebody help me make sense out of this. I cannot make sense of why someone would continue to be supportive of Donald Trump at this juncture. I mean, I could understand it at the beginning of the game, before he showed his hand, before he demonstrated some things. I could get it then. But now it's like, but then I recognize, I was like, I've got to stop and say, okay, wait a minute. What are these people hearing? Because I can tell you, these people, a lot of people think, I'm delusional. I'm like, where'd they get that idea from? Well, they get that idea from what they're reading or what they're not reading. And like I said, just so many things, so many paradigms, because we can talk about our educational system too, because a lot of our children are not being raised to think critically.
Oh,
they're
my
not
goodness.
taught.
I'm going to have Kym Crooms back. That's amazing that you're saying that, Kym. I did a Facebook post just recently. I talked about that critical thinking, but go ahead. I hate to interrupt you because you're flowing so good. You sounding like Carlen.
I want to go back to the Georgia campaign, because a lot of people are saying, because you have to understand.
Okay, we got about 4 minutes left in our show, so we're running out of time. So, but go ahead, because I want to hear all this, and I'll shelve my questions so I can have you back on another show and we'll talk about more. But go ahead, talk about that.
Okay, so in Georgia, as a lot of people know, the metro. A lot of people say the metropolitan area is very liberal, but the rural areas is very, very conservative. So the question, and we're about, the amount of quantity of people, I think, is somewhere around 50-50. So the question is, how do we tip the scales over? You cannot tip the scales over into blue unless some of those people who normally identify as red, if you will, didn't somehow have a change of heart and vote blue. How did that happen? So that's, that kind of gets to the crux of what you're asking, Carlen, is how did some people come to a purple place, when they normally standing on their in their margins. And I think if you look at my Pastor Warnock's campaign, one of the things that he did is he stayed very steady on message. He did not spend the majority of his advertisement time focused on hating on the other side, the opposition. He talked more about what he was going to do for people. And he also listened. He went to all those rural areas, and he knew that one of the things that, regardless of race, regardless of color, regardless of political affiliation, the thing that a lot of those rural people were screaming and shouting was, they're closing our hospitals. They're closing down our hospitals. We don't have health care in these rural areas. He honed in on that common concern of people, and he talked about what he was going to do to help people meet their needs, and he made sure that they understood he was going to be meeting their needs, not because they were Republican, not because they were Democrat, not because they were Black, not because they were white. He was going to meet their needs because they were a citizen of the state of Georgia. When he goes to Washington, D.C., he's going to be focused on the needs of the people in the state of Georgia. And his opposition ran ad after ad after ad that tried to denigrate his character and try to denigrate, they continually talked about him and trying to break down his character and tried to talk about, what they hated about him and tried to incite fear mongering. He tried to make people fearful of him, constantly driving fear. They drove fear, not love, not commonality, not, a place of where this is something that we can all work on together, shared interest. They steered away from shared interest. They just fear mongered. And I can tell you, that's not going to be the whole picture. That's not going to be the whole entire prescription, but that is something that we can look to as a place to start.
That is just beautiful. That is just beautiful. I know y'all probably thought that was Carlen's commentary going right there, but that was actually Kym Crooms coming out of the ATL. And it's just been we could go on for another hour, but our time is up, and I'm going to have Kym come back so she can finish that diatribe that sounded like Carlen's commentary, And what we thought was going to be a divisive show, what we thought we were going to be divided, we're just like totally united because I'm feeling all that. I mean, you said so many things, and we'll talk to you. We'll have to have talk about unity overtime so I can talk to you and talk about so many of the good things that you said, because you gave all the answers, and I think the answers that are appropriate, not just for Senator Warnock, but I mean, that is the way that we've got to behave. I heard his speech afterwards, and I went, that was beautiful. I mean, the stuff that he said, and I said, if only he doesn't change. Go to Washington, don't change. If he keeps that viewpoint, that's what we need. And like you said, he was willing to reach out to people who didn't look like him, who were not familiar with him, and that was beautiful. So I'm sorry that's all the time we have. So we're out of here. Loved having you on today, Kym. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thanks
I
for
love
having
you.
me, Carlen. Hey, Carlen, I got one more thing.
Okay, go ahead.
I just want to do, tomorrow is J13. Shout out to my Saras.
Wow. So you got anything to say about your pink and green sister there coming into the White House?
Hey, I support her wholeheartedly. I am so grateful to have a Divine Nine sister coming into the White House. But I will say this: you have to have a rough draft before you have a masterpiece. So yeah.
All right. Thank you all for being on Talk About Unity today. By the way, Senator Warnock, A5. Too cold. All right.
Yes.
Hey, thank you, Kym. Love you, and we thank you all for joining us today on Talk About Unity.
Okay.